She stood at the edge of the crowded street, her clothes simple, her face tired, and her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I just need a little help," she said, reaching out her hand to passersby. People barely gave her a glance. Some turned away with annoyance, others smirked, and a few even muttered rude comments under their breath. To them, she looked like just another poor woman begging in the city, unremarkable, invisible, and easy to ignore. But what no one knew was that the woman they were mocking had a past that could silence every cruel word. Her name was Maya. She once lived a life most could only dream of, high-ranking, respected, and admired. Yet here she was, standing helpless, being humiliated in front of a crowd that had no idea who she really was. The scene grew uncomfortable. A young man shoved past her, making her stumble. A group of teenagers nearby laughed, their phones out, ready to record. One woman scoffed loudly, saying, "Why don't you people just stay where you belong?" Maya didn't respond. She just looked down, clutching her small handbag like it was the last thing she owned. But not everyone in the crowd was cruel. A little girl tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering something. He paused, then his eyes widened as he got a closer look at Maya's face. He stepped forward, then stopped, unsure. Whispers began to spread. Someone in the back pulled out their phone, searched something quickly, and gasped. Another person murmured, "Wait, isn't that the woman from?" Suddenly, the mood shifted. People began to look closer, their mocking stares turning into curiosity and then shock. The same crowd that had turned its back on her was now frozen, unsure what to say. But Maya didn't look up. She remained quiet, the humiliation still fresh on her face, and just when it seemed like someone would finally speak up, a black SUV pulled up at the curb. A sharply dressed man stepped out, looked directly at Maya, and walked over with purpose. The crowd parted for him in silence. Maya finally lifted her eyes, and the recognition between them was instant. What happened next changed everything, and not just for Maya, but for everyone watching that day. The man who stepped out of the SUV was tall, clean-shaven, and carried himself with the kind of authority that made people pay attention. His tailored suit, polished shoes, and sharp eyes suggested he wasn't just someone important, he was someone used to being in control. As he walked toward Maya, the crowd grew even more silent. No one knew who he was, but it was clear he wasn't here by accident. Maya's eyes widened when she saw him. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. There was something familiar in her gaze, not fear, not surprise exactly, but a kind of distant pain. He stopped just a few steps away from her. For a long moment, they both said nothing. The tension in the air felt heavy. The people around them waited, watching closely, trying to piece together the connection between this man and the woman they had just humiliated. The man finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Maya, why didn't you tell anyone?" She lowered her eyes again. "Would they have believed me?" she asked quietly. Her voice was calm, but those few words hit hard. The crowd shifted, realizing slowly that there was more to this woman than they had assumed. A whisper spread through the group. She used to be someone powerful, maybe a government officer, or something in the military. No one was sure, but pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. A few older women began whispering to each other, recalling a name from the past. A name that had once been on the news, praised for bravery, then mysteriously disappeared. The man looked at Maya again, this time with something in his eyes that wasn't just concern, it was guilt. He turned toward the crowd. "You all think you know people by their clothes, by how much they have, but you don't. This woman, she gave more to this country than most ever will." But before he could say more, Maya stepped forward and gently placed a hand on his arm. "Not here," she said softly. "Not like this." Her voice had a quiet strength now, enough to make even the boldest in the crowd feel a little ashamed. Then, without another word, she turned and began walking away alone. The man didn't stop her. No one did, but everyone felt it. This wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. Maya walked down the street, her steps slow but steady. ignoring the lingering stares behind her. She had spent years avoiding moments like this, avoiding being seen. But the city had changed, and so had she. Still, she never thought she'd be forced to come back to this place, to these streets that once carried her name with pride. Back in the SUV, the man Armand stood quietly, watching her disappear into the distance. He hadn't seen her in over 5 years, not since the investigation, not since everything fell apart. The guilt he carried had never faded. He had been one of the few who knew the truth about Maya's fall from grace, but like many others, he'd stayed silent when it mattered most. Now, seeing her like this, it hit harder than he expected. Meanwhile, in a nearby cafe, a young journalist named Sana had watched the entire scene unfold. She had just stepped out to grab coffee when the crowd gathered. At first, she thought it was just another viral moment waiting to happen. But as she heard Maya's name and saw Armand's face, her instincts kicked in. She quickly pulled out her phone and searched old headlines. Captain Maya Khan disappears after scandal, national hero or fraud. The deeper she dug, the stranger the story became. Nothing ever added up. The files ended too neatly. The details were vague. It smelled of a cover-up. Sana wasn't the only one curious. One of the teenagers who'd mocked Maya earlier stood near the corner, phone still in hand, watching the video he'd recorded. His smirk had faded. There was something about Maya's expression in the clip hurt, yes, but something else too. Dignity. It didn't fit the version of her he'd created in his mind. He hesitated before hitting upload. That night, Armand made a call to someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "She's back," he said, "and we can't keep the truth hidden much longer." On the other end, the line went quiet. Then a deep voice replied, "If Maya talks, everything unravels." "You know what's at stake." Armand clenched his jaw. He knew that was the problem, and somewhere, alone in a small rented room, Maya sat on the edge of a worn-out bed, holding an old photo. Her eyes burned, not from sadness, but from a decision she had avoided too long. This time, she wouldn't stay silent. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Maya's dimly lit room. She hadn't slept. The photograph in her hand was worn. At the edges, 3 faces, frozen in time. Hers, Armand's, and one more. A man the public had forgotten, but she could never erase. The same man who had disappeared just before the scandal. The same man whose name was quietly removed from official reports. There had been a time when they all trusted each other. But power changes people. Loyalty fades. And truth, Maya had learned, was always the first casualty. Across the city, Sana sat in her cramped newsroom, the glow from her laptop screen flickering in the dark. She had collected enough fragments to suspect something massive had been buried. Every piece led back to a failed covert operation, quietly sealed off in government files. Maya's sudden disappearance, Armand's quick promotion, the missing millions from a security budget. It was too perfectly hidden until now. Sana clicked on the latest video uploaded from the street, the one showing Maya's humiliation, and the moment everything shifted. It had already gone viral. Armand stood in his office, blinds shut, fingers strumming against his desk. The call from earlier still echoed in his mind. He was no longer sure which side he was protecting. His own silence had bought him years of comfort. But seeing Maya again had ripped open everything he had buried. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a locked folder. Inside were documents that could clear Maya's name or destroy the careers of people far more powerful than him. Meanwhile, a black car parked outside Maya's building. 2 men stepped out, dressed in plain clothes but clearly not ordinary visitors. They didn't ring the bell. One stayed outside, watching the street. The other slipped quietly into the lobby. Maya stood by the window, watching the rain, sensing something in the air. She knew this moment would come. Once the truth started leaking, those who had tried so hard to bury it would do anything to stop it from rising. She didn't have much time. She picked up the small USB drive hidden in the lining of her bag. Everything was on it, the proof, the names, the orders. It was the only piece left that could expose what really happened that night. She slipped it into her coat pocket and grabbed her keys. She wasn't running. She was going to face them. Maya stepped into the hallway, her fingers tightening around the USB in her pocket. The building was quiet to quiet. She paused before the stairwell, instinct kicking in. Something didn't feel right. Just then, a shadow moved behind the glass door at the end of the hall. She turned, calmly but quickly, and made her way to the fire exit. She'd learned long ago never to use the obvious route when someone wanted you silenced. As she slipped out into the rain-soaked alley, she didn't see the man inside the lobby check his phone and murmur, "She's on the move." Across town, Sana's screen pinged with an encrypted email, no name, just a file attached. She hesitated for a moment, then clicked. Her eyes widened as she scanned through scanned documents, transcripts, and names she recognized from government and military circles. Maya wasn't just a victim of politics. She had been set up to take the fall for an operation that went far deeper than anyone guessed. The real reason? She had refused to obey a direct order that would have endangered innocent lives. That refusal cost her everything. The more Sana read, the more she realized this story wasn't just big, it was dangerous. There were people in power today who had everything to lose if the truth came out. She picked up her phone and called Armin. "She has the files," Sana said without greeting. "And they're explosive. You know this ends one of two ways." Armin's voice was low. "Then we better make sure it ends the right way." At that exact moment, Maya was boarding a late-night bus headed to a place only she remembered, a safe house outside the city that no one had visited in years. It was the last location where the full mission report had been backed up. But someone else remembered it too. From a dim office filled with security monitors, a man in a dark sweater leaned back in his chair and watched a grainy live feed of the bus station. "She's going back," he said, barely audible. "She still thinks that place is hidden." His assistant looked worried. "Should we intercept her?" He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. Let her dig up the rest. Then we take everything, unaware." She was being tracked. Maya sat quietly by the window of the bus, rain streaking down the glass, unaware the storm wasn't over, it was only just beginning. The bus pulled into a deserted stretch of road just before dawn. Maya stepped off, her coat soaked at the edges, boots crunching against gravel. The safe house sat tucked behind a line of trees, weathered but untouched. She entered quickly, locking the door behind her. Dust coated the furniture, but the old metal cabinet in the corner was exactly where she remembered. Inside, wrapped in layers of worn cloth, was the backup drive. Her fingers trembled slightly as she powered up the ancient laptop and inserted the device. Everything she had kept hidden for years began to come alive: logs, voice recordings, satellite images, and command orders with signatures that had long been scrubbed from public record. Meanwhile, Sana arrived at the edge of the woods, following the location Maya had finally shared after a brief call. She stepped into the house just as Maya was decrypting the last file. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they were about to release hung heavy in the air. Armin arrived minutes later, alone. He closed the door behind him and looked at Maya, then Sana. "This will ruin lives," he said, "but it will also set things right." Maya nodded. "That's the point, isn't it?" Together, they uploaded the files to Sana's secure server. Within minutes, the data was moving, leaked to trusted journalists, whistleblower networks, and even international agencies. The silence that had protected those responsible for so long was finally broken, but just as relief began to settle in, a sudden low hum echoed outside. A drone hovered near the tree line, red light blinking. Maya rushed to the window. "They found us before they could react." A black SUV came screeching down the road. Armin reached into his coat, ready to protect them if needed, but the doors flew open and two figures jumped out. To everyone's shock, they weren't agents, they were reporters. "We got the files," one said breathlessly. "We came to protect the source." In that moment, the entire weight of the story shifted. The people Maya feared were no longer chasing her in the dark. Now, the spotlight was on them. Her truth was out, and the world was watching. But just as Maya allowed herself a breath of peace, Sana's phone buzzed. A message popped up from an unknown number. You found the truth, but not all of it. Look into Unit 17. The screen went black, Maya's eyes narrowed. The war wasn't over, it had just changed names. For a moment, Maya stared at the message on Sana's phone, her heart still racing from the events of the morning. Unit 17. The name stirred something in her memory, a classified division she'd heard whispers about back during her service. A shadow unit, always off the record, used for missions that even senior officials denied. It explained the gaps in the files, the orders with no origin, the names that disappeared overnight. But as tempting as it was to dig deeper, Maya knew her mission for now was complete. The truth about the cover-up had gone public within hours. News channels across the country aired pieces of Maya's story, her recordings, and the stolen operation logs. Faces once untouchable were now under investigation. Public outrage swelled, not just at the betrayal of a national hero, but at the system that allowed it to happen. Maya, once ridiculed on the street, was now being called courageous, resilient, and a symbol of silent strength. Sana's article became the leading story across platforms, her byline recognized far beyond her small newsroom. She was offered interviews, partnerships, even a book deal. But more than fame, she felt a responsibility. She had helped restore someone's truth, and in the process, exposed how easily power can twist reality when left unchecked. Armin, for his part, resigned quietly, refusing interviews or public comment. He knew the damage his silence had done, but before stepping away, he handed over a final document to Maya, evidence of funds linked to the same officers connected with Unit 17. It was his way of saying sorry, and a reminder that the work wasn't finished. Maya chose not to return to the public eye. She turned down awards, declined press events. Instead, she started a quiet foundation to support whistleblowers and women in uniform who had been silenced like her. She didn't need to be a hero in headlines. She had already done what mattered most. She stood her ground. As the days passed and the noise settled, she finally found peace in the small moments, watching rain fall without fear, walking through a market without shame, smiling without pretending. Her story was no longer one of humiliation, but of justice, truth, and quiet resilience. And though the message about Unit 17 lingered in the back of her mind, for now, Maya chose to breathe. The storm had passed. The fight, if needed again, would find her ready.